I had to leave Iran because the government found out of all the stuff that I was doing, and my security note was out. 300,000 people were arrested and executed overnight. They basically arrested people and shot them and put them in mass graves. I grew up in Iran. My dad was American. My mother was Iranian. Growing up in Iran, it was during the time of the Shah of Iran, and it was a country that was very friendly to the Western culture and all of that stuff. And that's how I grew up. Then the Islamic Revolution happened, and everything changed. The enforcement of the Islamic laws and all of that completely changed the country, not just for me, but for everybody. I have a younger sister who's 2 years younger than me. Life really changed for her because a lot of the women's freedoms were taken away. I remember when during the revolution, when we were going to school, we had to like jump over bodies that the night before and all over the street. And I was trying to basically shield my sister from seeing all of it. I kind of felt responsible for her because right before the revolution, my American father left Iran saying that he's going to bring us to America, and he never did. And 35 years later, found out he worked for the CIA and he was a CIA agent. So growing up there was very different during those times. Being the American kid going to school in that environment was very difficult. After my dad left, my mom got married again. I was 7 years old at the time, and it wasn't a very good thing for us as kids because even though he was very nice to everybody else and all of that stuff, I was sexually abused for about 4 or 5 years until I was old enough that he wasn't interested anymore. And it was a deal that I made with him actually at that time. Basically, he can do whatever he wants as long as he doesn't touch my sister. So there was a lot of rage at the time inside of me growing up. So I rebelled. Rebellion was against the government. And because my stepdad was a very pro-Islamic government and all of that stuff, so I hated the government because of him to begin with, and then I hated the government because of who they were and what they did. All of that kind of made me join a lot of anti-government groups. I had to leave Iran because the government found out of all the stuff that I was doing, and my note was out. And if I would have gotten caught, I would probably don't be here talking to you about it. Somebody estimated probably about 300,000 people were arrested and dead overnight in a lot of the prisons without any trials, without any jury, without anything. They basically arrested people and shot them and put them in mass graves. And so getting out of the country was not easy. I had to cross the border from Iran into Turkey. It took me about a week to get to the Turkish border. Kind of lost track of time because traveling to the mountains of between Turkey and Iran, couldn't just go to a border guards and just walk across the border. So there was a bunch of Bedouins in Kurdish Bedouins that live between Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. That's kind of their areas, and there's a lot of them that are sheep herders, and they have thousands of sheep that they kind of herd in that area. It's high up in the mountains. The air is thin. It's cold. Lots of snow. What they did was at the time people they knew there was a lot of people that needed to get out of Iran. You would basically pay them. They would give you a sheepskin. You would put on the sheepskin, and they would kind of put you in the middle of their sheep because they were all friends with the border guards and all of that. They were no threat to anybody. So they would basically herd the sheep across the borders, and you would get out on the other side of the border. Walking among the sheep was probably about, I would say, probably about 5, 6 miles, basically on your hands and knees with the sheepskin over you so the border guards can't spot you as a human being in middle of the sheep. And that's what I did. There were a lot of people with us during that journey, and they broke us up at the end to cross the border in sections. A lot of women, people with kids, with small children, and all of that. They all wanted to get out of the country. So it was groups of people that were crossing the border like that. And once I got into Turkey, I basically turned myself into the Turkish authorities, basically telling them that I'm American. Finally, I got in touch with the American embassy. It took a while for them to validate everything that I was saying, and finally got my American passport. I barely spoke English, just a few words here and there. Didn't speak any Turkish, didn't have any money, so had to kind of figure all that out. I was lucky enough. I met an Iranian gentleman in Turkey that helped me. Him and I kind of became friends and lived in Turkey for a while, working under the table because I wasn't allowed to work in Turkey, trying to save up some money to buy a ticket to the US. And That took a long while. The feeling of being safe during that time, being connected at least to something and working towards something. My passport, because it was American, I was only allowed to stay in Turkey for 30 days at a time. So I ended up in Brussels at one point. When I was in Brussels, I found out that I couldn't go back to Turkey again because the Iranian agents have figured out that I was in Turkey and they were still looking for me, and heard a lot of the Iranian anti-government people being kidnapped in Turkey and taken back across the border into Iran. So I had to stay in Brussels. At least it was a safer place. I got a job as a dishwasher working under the table in Belgium until I had enough money to basically buy a plane ticket and come to the US. Coming to the US was a whole new experience. I turned 20 a month before I came to the US. Growing up in Iran, in Europe, and all of that, I was watching all of these movies and things from the United States, and my image of the United States was what was in the movies, basically. I had no idea what I was in for. So coming to the United States, I looked around, I'm like, okay, now what? Don't know anybody, can't barely speak the language. I had about $50, and the place I landed was Detroit. The way they looked at me was very different, especially when they figured out that I'm not actually American. I didn't grow up in America. I grew up somewhere else. And it was a pretty rough neighborhood at the same time. There was this really lovely lady. She was a black lady and kindest person I have ever met. She helped me so much in that whole process. She didn't have to, but it was just out of the kindness of her heart. I'll never forget her. She passed away a few years ago. She helped me in that whole process of basically getting integrated into the process. And during that time, I really learned so much about race relations in America, how all of that worked. And it was always very puzzling to me at the time why people fight with each other over things that doesn't really make a difference. I was there for probably about a year. Life became a little normal. As I was working in the fast food, there was an army recruiting station across the street. There was this army gentleman that he used to come in, and we would talk a lot of times, and he basically asked me, if you don't like the way things are going here, you want to sign up for the army. So I signed up. I had a little bit of military experience, but it was totally different. Then they were asking for volunteers to go through Airborne School. I went through Airborne School. Came out of Airborne School, they were asking for volunteers to go through Ranger School. I signed up for that too. I didn't really care at that point. When I wrote the book, one of the reviewers said, when I read your story, what I kind of get out of it is that you were very uncomfortable with peace. And that is very true. When you come across as a survival mode, you just don't know how to deal with peace anymore. I didn't know what peace means. You feel like there's something missing. You feel like you're missing something. You're always looking for the other shoe to drop, waiting for something else to happen. When it's quiet, when there's nothing going on, that's the time you start to really get anxious and worry. So going through all of the training and all of that stuff, I got assigned to a special operations team and working with special operations in the U.S. Army. That's when the first Gulf War happened when Iraq invaded Kuwait and they deployed American troops over there. I was deployed with that team on the liberating the Kuwait city and all of that stuff. Lost a few friends there. From there on in the military, it was like one mission after another. The focus was all around the missions. Watch humanity at its worst. And it was stupid over things that didn't really matter. And we weren't allowed to intervene. Our job was to go get all of the Western missionaries out of. It's a scar that I can never heal. We were in this village and I walked into this hut. There was this mother. She was dead, obviously, and she was holding a baby and her breasts were cut off. So she couldn't feed the baby, and they tied the baby to her as she watching that baby to death. And they were both dead by the time we got there. Just the image of that was, we would drive and you see piled up size of 2-story buildings, all cut with machetes. You can't even imagine watching 7-8-year-olds without their ears. What does that 7-year-old capable of doing that you have to do something like that to it? I try not to think about it. So we would walk into these makeshift hospitals. There were people there trying to help and they didn't want to leave. And we had to forcibly take him and throw him into helicopters to get him out of there. It was just ugly. And then Somalia, people starving to death. It's constantly in my mind, in those emotions of why? Why is it like this? And then leaving there and going to Bosnia during the Bosnian conflict. And that's where I got injured. Took some in my legs, and I was technically dead for 10 minutes until they revived me. Being in a hospital and waking up and not knowing what happened, my military career was over. I had to figure out something else to do. I had to learn how to walk again. Around 2009, I got a phone call from my father, and I met him. And come to find out, he was part of my life the whole time, and I didn't even know about it. He was from the background. He monitored everything in my life, all of my army missions, all of the things that I went on. He was from a distance kind of part of. And when I asked him, I said, "So why did you have a family? Why did you do all of this?" He very unemotionally, he kind of looked at me and said, "Well, having a family is the best way to have a cover when you're in my business." My sister lives in Copenhagen now. After the first time she met him, she didn't want anything to do with him after that. Then from then on, I did everything I could. And then I got into a civilian career into computers at the time. And since then, I've been talking, writing, telling people stories, trying to make sure they understand that there is a lot more out there, and there's a lot more. If everybody does a little piece, we can change the world.